Well, hey guys, so not everyone here knows who I am. My name is Jessica Leichtweisz. I am classically trained in ABA therapy. 5 years ago, I opened my own company, Hope Education Services, when I discovered that not all parents knew how to help their children with autism. And a couple of years into working through my company, I started to get comments from autistic adults that were providing me feedback that they felt like I wasn't doing the right thing. And I never knew that.
I can listen.
I always just thought that, I was doing exactly what I was told. I was doing everything I was trained on. And I thought I was doing the right thing, and I thought I was doing really good. And what I learned is that there's a really phenomenal community of autistic adults, and they have things to say. And some of what they have to say is that what we've been doing as professionals, and even as some what parents have been doing for their children, thinking they're doing the best thing, isn't in alignment with what a lot of autistic adults think. And so what I decided to do is to create a platform where we can give a voice in a community to autistic adults. I think it's fantastic that technology now allows for people to come together. And, it didn't exist. When I first started doing what I did, and I started prior to even Facebook coming out in the field of autism, so that tells you how long I've been doing this. And there was no unified community of autistic adults. And so professionals did the best they could, but today we have more information. And so I truly believe that I can, as a teacher, as an ABA person, as an autism, I profess as an autism expert, I can teach you about education strategies and behavior strategies. I can help kids learn to talk. But I do believe if you really want to understand autism, it doesn't come from only listening to professionals. It comes from listening to people that have autism. And so I put together a panel of autistic adults. This is an opportunity, if you're present as parents, to ask your questions directly to autistic adults. And I also have questions that were sent in to people that can't make it to ask everybody. So I have 3 men and 3 women on the call today. I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves so you know who they are. And then we're going to get into question and answers, and you can ask questions. And I also have some questions that were sent in. So I'm going to ask Ian if you can start and just introduce yourself and tell us your story, who you are, what diagnosis you got, when you got your diagnosis, and so we can get to know you.
Wait, were you talking to me?
Yeah, sorry. Aidan, do you mind starting?
Cut in like right when you said, okay, sure. Hi, my name's Aidan. I am 18 years old. I have autism. I was diagnosed at a pretty young age. At that point, they didn't really call it autism. They kind of just called it PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental delay, not otherwise specified. And I've been living with it all my life and will die with it. And yeah, so that's kind of that. I run a consulting and educational advocacy firm where I work with students and families struggling in schools, and I provide support with IEP services. That we do a lot. So yeah, that's kind of my story, I guess.
Thank you so much, Aidan, for sharing that. So yeah. Rachel, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of your background.
Okay. So my name is Rachel. I'm 23 years old. I was diagnosed at 3 years old, and of course, there wasn't really a term for autism at the time, but I got savant syndrome thrown at me quite a bit because I was hyperlexic as well. And now I love being on stage, I love singing, and I want to become an author.
That's awesome, Rachel. And you even have won some pageants, right?
Yeah, I took my love of the stage and all to pageants because I wanted to come out of my shell and make friends that were girls, because boys are mostly diagnosed with autism.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're currently learning as autism professionals is that autism manifests differently in boys and girls, and a lot of parents don't know that. And that the traditional definition of autism is actually designed to pick up what autism looks like in boys. So while there probably are truly more boys that have autism, it's probably not really 4 to 1, which is what the current believed ratio is. Probably the assessments don't pick it up in girls. So Monica is nodding her head yes, and she'll share her story. So she didn't get a diagnosis as a child, and she's a friend of mine, and she's in a devotional group her and I do together. And she got a diagnosis later in life, probably for that very reason. So Monica, can you tell us a little bit about your story and your background?
Hi, like Jessica said, my name is Monica. I grew up with an understanding that I did not fit, but not knowing why, which left me really frustrated and disconnected from my community. I've worked with kids with developmental disorders and maladaptive behaviors due to trauma for about a decade and a half. And through all of that, I kind of figured out for myself that I was autistic, and working with the community and seeing a lot of the traits that I was parenting in myself. And then in that, I became very concerned with what was being asked of me as far as formal ABA went, that I wasn't comfortable with that because I wouldn't have been comfortable with that as a child put in that situation. So I left formal ABA environments and no longer participate, and sought out formal diagnosis almost a year ago. So I do have an actual diagnosis at this point. And because I am an adult seeking diagnosis, it would cost me upwards of $6,000 in Ontario to get the psychoeducational evaluation to say you're autistic with these traits. So I just have a diagnosis that says, yeah, you're autistic, and that's all we know, which I'm fine with. That's validating. One of my favorite quotes is, diagnosis wasn't a tragedy, it was an affirmation of my humanity. And that was a really big thing for me and my family. It's likely that both of my brothers are also autistic. So it's been an interesting journey the last year or so, opening up some doors to better understanding our family function and things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Monica, just because we're on that topic, and I think you're the only person I could ask this question, before we finish introducing our panel, which was my intention, one of the things that parents always wonder is if they should get a diagnosis. Because there's this fear that their child will be labeled and there'll be this stigma. And I always tell parents is that's your own crap to get over. And pardon me for being so blunt, but that, you know, if you do not get your child a diagnosis, the truth is, without a diagnosis, there's no diagnostic code. And unfortunately, you need a diagnostic code to pay for services. And services help children to grow and to learn. And also, I feel like a lot of the autistic adults that I speak to, whose parents didn't get them a diagnosis, say they were confused, they didn't understand themselves, they were depressed. Some of them even talked about attempting or wanting to attempt suicide. And not that that's your story, but because they didn't understand who they are. So because this webinar is particularly designed for parents, and that's a question I get every day, you know, what would you say to a parent that is wondering if they should get their child a diagnosis, or if they should avoid that diagnosis to avoid what they perceive is a stigma attached to it?
Well, I think that we're still kind of in the middle of that stigma, and it can be a reality and not just the perception. So I, in part, am thankful that I was not diagnosed as a child, because of a lot of what kids diagnosed 20 years ago, 25 years ago went through. I didn't go through that. And I had parents who Did they screw some stuff up, and was I punished for things that probably I shouldn't have been because I didn't have the capacity to deal with those things? Yes. But does any parent raise their kid perfectly? No. So I think that I'm glad that I wasn't diagnosed as a child for what diagnosis looked like 20 years ago. But now I have friends who I'm talking about this very thing with right now. And I think that, like I had said, was the diagnosis was the affirmation of my humanity. I think that's true for a lot of kids, that they feel like they're wrong and they don't fit. And I think that if we can bring diagnosis in light of it's just different, you're not broken, you're not unintelligent, there's not anything wrong with you, but your brain is wired to function a little bit differently than your peers, and that's okay. And if you bring diagnosis in that type of conversation, it's a really healthy and productive thing. But if the parent isn't ready to have a conversation like that, I don't find diagnosis to be healthy at that point, because now you have a kid that doesn't feel like they fit and feels stupid too. So the parent has to be prepared for full acceptance before they talk about it with the child.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think that there's, when I started working with kids with autism, it was at the height of this, what was called the autism recovery movement, the idea that children needed to be recovered of autism. Now, I do know firsthand, just with medical professional knowledge and working with kids, that a lot of times that people that are autistic, they have a tendency to have other health issues, and that if any person is not feeling well, that they're not able to learn the most effective way. I myself, like, for example, if I eat gluten, this sounds silly, I get brain fog. Like, and if I eat too much gluten, like I had a slice of pizza today, if I eat too much, I can do it once in a while, but if I did it every day, I might literally wake up feeling hungover, having not drank anything, because that's the effect it has on my body. And people that are autistic, they tend to have those, some of the more, they have more of a tendency to have those issues, not only with gluten, but with other things. And so, yes, you have to understand that you have to treat an individual as a whole individual, but, taking that out of the equation isn't going to take autism away. It's just going to give them, you're going to be getting rid of one of those other things that's going on with the child. And you do have to do that. But that doesn't mean that you're trying to cure somebody of something or really change who they are as a person. It's just really treating an individual as a whole individual. So thank you so much, and we'll get into more questions. I do want to finish introducing our panel. So Jessie was one of my very first guests on my TV show called Bridge the Gap, and I'm hoping all the panelists come on that show. So Bridge the Gap is a show I started. Like I said, I got a lot of feedback from autistic adults. I was doing the wrong thing. I didn't know. Most professionals, they just say, and I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be blunt on here, because I'm all about raw, real, honest conversations. Because if we're not honest, if no one's willing to say this, then nothing's going to change. And I do want to have a change in the community. But most professionals just say, oh, those autistic adults, they don't know what they're talking about. And they just are saying that because they're autistic and they don't have social skills. The reality of it is professionals need to listen. And that's what most professionals say. And I've heard most professionals say that I'm not that person. So when someone told me, and it was not one person, not two people, but more people, hey, listen, what you're saying, I recognize you're trying to help, but you're not right. When enough people said that, I was willing to listen. And so I started this TV show called Bridge the Gap. It actually does play across the nation on several public access television shows. And it's getting some media attention. Even just this week, I was quoted in Forbes and New York Times for other work I'm doing. So, I really want to solve this issue of getting adults, professionals on the same page, so we don't repeat mistakes that we made in previous generations. Because every day we're learning more about autism, and today we have this incredible opportunity to talk to adults, which didn't exist before this technology existed. So Jessie was one of my first guests on that show, and he's just been a really great advocate for me. I'm very grateful to have him in my life. He's really supported me, and I've learned a lot from him. So Jessie, thank you so much for being here. And if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I just want to apologize for all the moving around before. I had to get situated and find the right lighting, and I may have to move again because someone is texting me nonstop at the worst possible time over there. But anyway, I want to thank you for having me here. I have Asperger's syndrome, and I was not diagnosed until the age of 14 after a lifetime of very disastrous transitions. I have to say that it's extremely rare for a transition to ever go well, and it's caused me to hate and fear any type of major change. And I've always associated transitions with fixing what was working perfectly fine and possibly lapsing into a living nightmare. And sadly, that has not changed that much. So I advocate for a lot of preparation for transitional periods instead of the theory that if you throw a child in the water, metaphorically, then they'll start to swim on their own. It never happens that way. It's almost always a colossal mess. But there's so much to talk about. I'll try to abridge it as much as I can. But I have many platforms. I love working with schools and children in the prime of their development. I think that we should be creative and develop some very unorthodox tactics to help a child succeed. For example, if a child is having major outbursts all the time during a typical week, then do not try to control the outbursts. Encourage the child to have only 3 outbursts every week, and let that child know that you're going to hail them as a hero if they only explode 3 times. And as long as it does not involve hurting other children, then that child will be praised. It's not realistic or remotely possible to expect a child with autism to walk on eggshells all the time and be close to perfect. A lot of times it solves one problem but creates many others. And I have to say that one of my greatest strengths is not being able to let things go. That has not changed for the better in the past 38 years. I cannot let go. And we all say there's no such thing as can't, but after 38 years of making such little progress, I think there is such a thing. But that's led me to succeed in fields where it was not right for me, such as the human service field, where you have to really watch everything you say. I consider it to be a personal insult when someone says, this is not for you. The other major struggle I have is a huge phobia of unnecessary waste. I'm absolutely terrified to go into restaurants because they rarely ever listen. When I say no straw and no plastic silverware, so that's something that that's a phobia I think everyone should have, in my opinion. There'd be no global warming or pollution. And the last thing I want to say is the major focus of my life right now is a convalescent plasma campaign. There's a PSA of me on YouTube donating blood while giving a motivational speech during the live donation. And unfortunately, despite my best efforts, it's performed extremely poorly on YouTube, and there's nothing I can do about it. I cannot force people to invest 67 seconds of their lives looking at my footage. So I'm desperate for all the help I can get. And I think that's the key toward digging ourselves out of the coronavirus.
Well, Jesse, we will post the video in the comments. So everybody here, if they can go and watch Jesse's video. I know Jesse is really passionate about that. And you got some media attention, right? You were in the national media this week for that, right?
Not quite. More like the local CBS, the local News 10 ABC News. And that helped, but the views are still languishing at just 167. And I'm reaching out to the national media. I received an email that was very promising from the CEO and president of the American Red Cross, so the person that's in charge of the Red Cross in all 50 states. So I'm hoping she'll email me back after my attempt to reply today. So that's the first promising thing that's happened in 2 months. And as a child, I was always fascinated by blood drives and phlebotomy machines. Chances are, if I were telling my neurotypical peers that, a few of them would say, "Oh God, you're so weird," or "You're such a loser." And we must redefine the essence of what cool is, especially with the autism population.
Yes. Well, I have donated blood in the past, so something I think everybody should be doing. So thank you so much, Jesse, for the work you're doing with that. So next I'm going to ask, thank you, Michele to come out. So Michele is from my hometown of New Jersey. Not my hometown, but my home state. Both Jersey girls. Like a lot of the people on this panel, Michele got a diagnosis of autism and works today with kids with autism. And you'll see that as a theme. A lot of the people, a lot of the adults on this panel do work in either directly with autistic kids or in with the special needs population. Michele was also a guest on my show, Bridge the Gap. She was the first woman to come on my show, which was super exciting to have her on. And Michele, thank you so much for being here. She is also a blogger. Her blog was pretty well known. It's Exceptional Shell. So awesome. Michele, I'm actually pretty close to your house right now. I'm in Seaside. And so if you guys notice my background, I normally have a professional lighting and a professional background, but I'm in quarantine. My mom has a beach house. She's not using it. And if you have to be in quarantine, then the beach is a better place to do it than where my normal place I live. So we're here. But thank you so much, Michele, for coming on. And if you could tell us a little bit about your story.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So if you don't know me already, my name is Michele Vinokurov, and I was diagnosed with autism before the age of 2 in Downstate Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. And for me, my life was completely different before. My autism at the time, I was on the severe side of the spectrum, so I pretty much lacked eye contact. I couldn't even communicate until I was 6 years old. I said my first word when I was 6, and I pretty much was in my own world at that time. I was pretty much I was dependent on my parents and with everything, and was told that I would never be able to speak and everything. And now today that I work with elementary school children with autism as a paraprofessional, I have given keynote speeches since I was 18 all over New Jersey as a self-advocate / autism advocate. I've spoken for many special ed organizations and parent advisory groups. And I also am a blogger for my own blog series and stuff. And I have social media platform that called Exceptional Shell. That's my platform. So if you follow me on there, that's where you can see all my my advocacy work and everything, as well as about my blog series that's called The World of Autism that you could follow as well.
Thank you. And Michele, we will also link to that in the comments below. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So the next guest, our last panelist, definitely not the least, is my friend Kevin Galbreth. He is awesome. He was also on Bridge the Gap. We are local to each other. He's also from New Jersey, very near my hometown. We have a mutual friend that introduced us. He is the only guest that was on Bridge the Gap to have recorded it in my house. So everything else was done virtually via Zoom like this. He actually came to my house and we recorded it, which was really cool. He also is a host of the podcast, The Three Amigos. And he had me on as a guest twice on his podcast. So I'm very grateful for that. We just did a couple weeks ago where we talked about how sports could be adapted to reflect allowing more autistic kids to participate in even professional sports, things we can do to really help people that are autistic to shine in sports. So Kevin, thank you so much for being here. And if you could tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure, thank you for having me. And so my name is Kevin, and I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And that's a term that actually no longer exists, as I understand it. They've merged it into the just autism, category. And but yeah, I was probably also diagnosed at a time when it was like one of the first people to be diagnosed. It was just getting introduced to the new DSM at that time. That was like back in like the early 90s, and then and now since then it's been in the new DSM. They've taken it out. So, but anyway, yeah, I also am someone who does services, works with adults with developmental disabilities. To this date, I've mostly done work with adults with developmental disabilities in a group home, capacity, and working in the group homes and assisting with daily living skills and doing like community outings and stuff like that. And I've generally been someone who's trying to use my experience of growing up on the spectrum to help, better the lives of, better the lives of others who are on the spectrum and have any kind of disability they're battling.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kevin. And I know you're doing really amazing work. And I love the fact that not only you, but Michele and Jesse and everyone on the panel is really working with other people that have special needs, and it gives you this connection and understanding. And that's why you're here, right? Is because, like I tell parents all the time, is I can give you strategies, but if you want to understand autism, you have to talk to someone who has autism. I can't describe what it feels like to have a sensory overload, or I can't describe what it feels like to not be able to communicate because I haven't had those experiences. So that's why I think it's so important that professionals align with autistic adults. We all work together to make things easier for children. And that's really the goal for every parent. I believe the goal for every parent should be is to make their children's lives easier and more fulfilling. So, and I hope everyone on the who's here agrees with that. So we've had everybody on the panel introduce themselves. Now, I see some people are chatting things in. Okay, perfect. So just some technical stuff. If any parent is on here, if you would like to unmute, if you're muted or if you're not muted, you can just ask your question. Or if you want to chat it in, if you have a private question, you can also chat me privately. If you know how to use Zoom, you can do that through the chat feature if you have any questions for any of our panelists. If not, I did have questions sent in, but I'm going to give the parents a chance right now to unmute and to ask any questions. I know Leeza, I see Leeza is raising her hand. So Leeza, can you unmute? And Leeza is awesome. So Leeza is a autism mom. She is also a blogger. Her blog is Mama AF. She has done 2 videos with me on my YouTube channel. She's awesome. So thank you so much, Leeza, for being here. And if you can ask your questions and we'll have the panelists answer them.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us parents. I have a question surrounding public education. So my son is 4.5. He was diagnosed autism last year. He's currently in the local school district's special ed preschool, where he's getting like speech and OT, and he's really thriving, and I think he's having a really good time with his friends in there. My question for you is, what is your experience or perspective on being autistic in the public education system? And either as a parent, I would like to see his socialization increase and, trying to make friends and those kinds of things, but of course don't want to put the pressure on him if it's not within his comfort zone. But what is your perspective on special ed classes versus general ed classes within the public school district versus trying to find a specialized school for kids with autism or special needs?
That's an amazing question, and it's one that I get all the time, and I actually know what I tell parents, and I'm interested myself because I've never asked adults this question to hear what their answer is. So I'm gonna just go in order of how I see people. So Aidan, you're like first on my screen again. So if you can answer that question, I'm gonna give all the panelists a chance to answer that. And I know Michele works in the school system, so certainly she's very qualified to answer. But if Aidan, you can start and tell us about your experiences in public school, what type of classes you were in, and if you think you got the proper education in those classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, it's very nice to meet you, Leeza, and I'm glad that your 4-year-old is doing pretty well at the school district. So I really actually connect really well with this school question, because that's pretty much the crux of what I do as a professional and as kind of my experiences. So I have a lot of parents have asked me before, you know, is this placement the right fit for him? Should he be going to a special needs school? Should he be staying within district? So there's always that kind of in between of what's going to be best for my son. And there's two answers that I always will tell people. The first is that every kid is different, number one. And so depending on how he's doing and depending on what particular services he's having, let's say at your district, in your example, if he's thriving and you as a parent, I mean, you know your kid the most out of everyone. You know, the child's going to be in school for about 8 hours, but you're really living with him for 24 hours. And so, you know, you're really going to be the type of person that can really gauge and kind of see whether my kid is actually growing and thriving. And if he is, then depending on the services that he's received at the school, that you hopefully you collaborated with the case manager and with the team, it should be something that is positive, and it should be something that's happening. And if you feel as though there's an issue, there's more meltdowns, let's say he's not doing well academically, or there's struggles with socialization, that could be an indication that there might need to be more services or more types of things presented. Now, on the topic of kind of my personal experiences, public school was really challenging for me. You know, I went to elementary school, and it was pretty good. You know, I enjoyed it a lot, and I had the services that I needed. Or then middle school, it was okay. There were some things that were really great about it, and then unfortunately there were some things that were very challenging. And really how it all came together for me and why I really became passionate about advocacy and consulting was my experience is in high school. And I was pretty much like bullied relentlessly, and I had a really hard time. My administration really let me down. And this was at a public school district, and unfortunately, we had to go through the legal system, and we had to fight tooth and nail, because unfortunately some public school districts really have a hard time with, and this is due to budgetary restrictions, and this is due to a lot of other factors, but they really tried to fight me, and I came out and I won with it. And I went to an alternative school. It wasn't a special needs out of district placement. I went to an alternative school in my experience, but it was the best thing for me. And it was the best thing for me because I was able to be in a safe space, and I was able to actually grow as a person, as a human, as a student, and as someone that really actually was, for the first time in life, was incentivized to make relationships. I wasn't before, because every step of the way, there was always some type of bullying, there was always some type of negative reaction. So when I was finally at this great school, I felt like I could do it. I felt like I could get to that point where I'm able to develop intimate relationships with people. And I think that the best way for you to determine that is if your child isn't happy, you're a parent, and you have to blog and everything. That's great. Just continue to fight and continue to check in with them and seeing, hey, how are you doing today? Or doing that type of check-in will really, really, really help. And as always, you can always, if you ever have any questions, it's kind of my specialty. You can always check out my website, www.secacommunity.com. We can always talk, and that goes really with everyone. So it's such a hard time, especially during this COVID, and it's really hard to sometimes see whether your child is making meaningful progress. So sometimes having somebody to help you out with that can be helpful. So I hope that your son has an even greater experience next year, and the next year, and the next year, and that his experiences were a little bit better than mine. And I think we need to work on that as a whole society to make sure each child has an even better experience than the ones before, because we're in a new age, we have new information, And, that's something that we need to do as a whole.
That's amazing advice, Aidan. Thank you so much for sharing that and your perspective. And that's why I'm doing this, and there's just so much more you can share having gone through the experiences than I could ever give family. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Rachel, you're next on my list. So if you can address that question of like public school versus private school versus charter schools and services and pull-ins and pull-outs, what is your experience? And did you think you got a good education, and what worked and what didn't for you?
Well, I can talk about this all day. Well, I was bullied a lot in the first school I went to, but my mom, she advocated for me to be with everybody. So I thank her for that, because I think autistic kids should be with all the neurotypical kids. If you put them in their own little school, in their own little world, they'll be sheltered and they won't know what the real world is like. And even though I was bullied in all the schools that I was in, I'm so happy that I went through that, because that's why I advocate, especially in middle school. I advocate because there were a lot of special needs school people, self-included, going through that, and I was just like, I want to help people like myself and them. But it wasn't until high school people accepted me for who I was. So if it wasn't for those experiences, I just wouldn't be sitting here today. So in short, private schools, bad. They're just going to judge you for being you. I mean, I had my principal called me the devil's daughter for being autistic. But public school, they're required to help the autistic child. That's why they have an IEP. And I'm very thankful for more acceptance nowadays.
Yeah, and everyone has a different experience, which is, and I've heard people say, and I've even have been in private schools where sometimes I think it does work well, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just okay, there's a difference between, and I think that it really, every child has a different experience. If a person truly, really can't communicate and has severe health impairments and really needs support, it may be appropriate. But like you're saying, Rachel, it's like if someone can be with their peers, then they have to, people are going to live in society, right? When people graduate after 21, they're not going to be in a bubble. They're going to be around other people. So you have to prepare people for that. So I think that's really great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Jesse, you were next on my list. I know you struggled because we've had these conversations that you said you've had some really good teachers, and we said we're not going to put any names out there of the negative experiences, but I know you said you've had some good and some really, really bad experiences. So I know this is a topic you're really passionate about. So if you want to share your perspective.
My mother, Janice, was what you would call a pioneer because she advocated for me to be mainstreamed. I was in a special needs class from kindergarten until part of first grade. And I was sort of in a state of limbo in the sense that my intelligence did not warrant being in the class. I could have done better than the academics that were geared toward the special needs population. But at the same time, socially, I belonged in that class. And I remember they transitioned me and they did an incredibly poor job of explaining to me what was happening. It was kind of like a steady thing where I started going into this other class just for the specials, what we called gym, art, and music. And then I was in the class a little bit more during the next phase of transitioning, but no one really explained to me that it would start to become a permanent thing. I just remember it being unbelievably traumatic, and I definitely remember regressing in some of my behavior just as a way to rebel against the unrelenting changes. And I definitely agree with you, Rachel, that having people with autism sheltered in their own little world is not the answer. And private school can be extremely expensive, and sometimes that creates more problems. As I said, I always struggled during transitional periods. Therefore, the start of middle school and my freshman year of high school were living nightmares. When I became 14, that's when I was diagnosed after a brutal transition to high school. I had academic experiences, but those were kind of unnecessary as time went on. I think that throughout high school, the reason I did not need the services, because even though it was far from perfect, it was definitely a lot closer to perfect. My mother, Janice, she pushed me into a lot of extracurricular activities where my talents were appreciated, such as the school newspaper, the Students Against Drunk Driving Club, and the Best Buddies program, where I mentored somebody with greater special needs. There were definitely some enormous bumps in the road. I was a victim of catfishing at the age of 17 from the spring of my junior year well into the fall semester, and it would have lasted forever if my mother had not called the school where the woman said she was enrolled and found out that there was no one by that name enrolled at Franklin Delano Roosevelt High School. Therefore, after this experience battling catfishing and preventing my peers from becoming victims is a huge crusade in my life. And I want to teach people the signs of being victimized, and that there's some really bad people in the world who will see them as just easy targets and not human beings. While this does not happen every single day, I definitely get a few messages here and there from high school acquaintances who have not said a word to me in 20 years. And after a few social niceties, they almost always get down to business and say, hey, can I borrow $200 and I'll pay you back when I get my next check for unemployment. And that's just the way things are. And I want to teach my peers that if they are victimized, it's not the end of the whole world. And it's like getting a virus. We can compare it to the coronavirus. You suffer dearly and you feel like the lowest thing in the whole world, but what's left after this terrible experience are skills to help you and your peers from being victimized once again.
Yeah, and thank you, Jesse, for sharing and being so vulnerable, because it's not easy to talk about the things that happen to you that are painful. And, you know, for anyone who's watching this, catfishing, if you don't know the term, it means when someone pretends to be someone else. And that's very painful. And, you know, like you said, Jesse, is like you were vulnerable and someone took advantage of that. And it's I'm sorry that happened to you. But I thank you for sharing your story so we could learn, so other people can learn from that, so it doesn't happen to more people.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So Kevin, you were next on my list. What was your experience? What schools did you go to, public versus private? And what were your experiences, good, bad, and different? And what do you think for kids? Should they be in, kids that are autistic, should they be with their peers or should they be in a separate school?
Well, I think the answer is a general. I was mostly in the regular public school. The only time I was really in a special school was like in kindergarten. I was in like more of a specialized behavioral intervention class. And then in first grade, they were kind of trying me out in the mainstream public school, and my parents did have to kind of really advocate for me to stay there because the teachers really wanted to move me to special ed and also medicate me. Like really, I was a big behavioral challenge. I will say I was kind of like, you can say, the class clown kind of kid. I was constantly being disruptive in class, and like teasing peers, doing constantly, being disruptive. So, and I was pretty out of control. So teachers didn't really know how to deal with me. And then the solution that my parents and teachers kind of came up with after lots of, negotiations was for me to have a one-to-one aide. And I had a one-to-one aide pretty much up until high school. And up throughout elementary and middle school, I had a one-to-one aide. And then in high school, I was starting to outgrow a lot of those behaviors. So I didn't need we stopped using a one-to-one aide for me in high school. By like late middle school and early high school is when I was finally starting to outgrow a lot of my like class clown behaviors. And really from there on, it was overall, I think things were pretty successful for me. Like by the time I got to college, everything was great. Like I graduated college summa cum laude without really using any special accommodations. So I did sort of naturally outgrow a lot of my early challenging behaviors, but I'm not sure if that will be the case for everyone with autism. It was for me. And overall, my experience, I would say mostly positive. I mean, school was challenging for me. It was a struggle for me. That was why I was acting out a lot. So I'll definitely say school was challenging for me. But overall, when I look back on it, I think I had more positive, social experiences than negative. In both elementary, middle, and high school, I recall having, friends, like a few. I didn't have I was never like the really popular kid who had a bunch of friends, but I did have a few good friends. I think throughout most of my school years, I had a few really good friends. So I wasn't totally ostracized. And I think generally my peers did really accept me, even though I was different. I had mostly an experience of being accepted in spite of being different. And what else? And what else was I going to say there? As far as bullying goes, I maybe experienced that a little bit here and there, but I'd say it was minimal compared to what I hear of a lot of the horror stories I hear about bullying for people on the spectrum. And I will just say my positive experience, I think I got to give a lot of credit to the schools and the school district I was a part of. I had a lot of teachers who really, especially by the time I got to fourth grade, really were willing to go the extra mile to make, my inclusion successful. And peers accepted me because they really educated, the class on who I was, how I was different, and why I was different. So that is why I was fortunate to kind of go to a school district that had a lot of good teachers, like that. So, and as far as, really, I'm definitely someone, given my experiences, I'm a big advocate for public school and big advocate for least restrictive environments. But I understand that might not work for everyone. It depends on for some certain individuals that might not be realistic, and but for others, it might, but for some, I think it is, definitely should be, pursued. And it also kind of depends on the school district too. Like I said, I was fortunate to be in a really good school district, so it depends on the school district too. And what kind of, and the teachers, the professionals, are they going to be going the extra mile, to make the inclusion successful, and of course, as someone on the spectrum, if you're going to be a teacher in this day and age, you really got to be ready to go the extra mile to make the inclusion of everyone successful. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. And the good thing is that I think schools are getting better every year. So even when I first started doing this, there were not the supports in schools that there are today. And I would tell parents, you have to fight your kids to get out of the school because they're not getting the accommodations they need. But today, there really are a lot of really great accommodations. A lot of schools are doing really good jobs, which is fantastic, and everything is improving. Like you said, Kevin, often it depends on literally what teacher there's amazing teachers and there's really teachers that aren't great. You know, like I'm sitting here as an ABA person saying, let's unite the community. And I, recently was supervising someone who was doing ABA, and they were asking the child, like, what do you do with a ball? The child says, you kick a ball. And the ABA therapist was correcting them, saying, no, you throw a ball, because that was what the card said that she was supposed to accept as a response. And the kid is sitting there crying, saying, like, you can kick a ball. You do kick a ball. I mean, like, honestly, I wouldn't have blamed the child for kicking the teacher. I mean, reality is like the teacher was being ridiculous. So sometimes you have good teachers and sometimes you don't. And that's the truth. So, that makes all the difference. But so, Michele, I am interested in hearing your response, especially because you work in the school system.
Thanks, Jessica. And Leeza, thank you so much for sharing about with your son. Like, I not only have professional experience, like as a paraprofessional in the classroom, I have my own personal experiences being all over. When I moved to New Jersey from Brooklyn, my parents were in search of a school for me because I was still like on the severe side of the autism spectrum, because they felt like that was what was best for me at that time. So we actually even got to go visit the schools. Like we went to, in New Jersey, like any of the specialized schools, like the Douglas, at Rutgers. I've gone to all those schools, and they had like waiting lists like going on and everything. And I ended up attending Children's Center of Monmouth County. It's a specialized school in Neptune, New Jersey, for students with autism and multiple disorders. I attended there from like as early as 3 to 4, because it was as soon as I moved to New Jersey, to like all the way till 2nd grade. Because by the time I was like progressing more and more in terms of like how the teachers and the therapists and everybody was working with me really nicely. And like everybody's been saying, it depends on the child. Like it depends like what you think is best for them. You are the parents. You know your child best. So it's pretty much like up to you what you believe in your child. If you feel like they're ready, then go for it, And then like as go on, like in 3rd grade, I was in I'm back into my town school district, which I was very fortunate that I had a school district that worked really nicely and stuff. And like I was in a special ed classroom. It was pulled out for all day. I wasn't even in like general ed or even mainstream. I was in a pulled out special ed classroom, and like it was mostly boys. There wasn't even that many girls and stuff. So it was a little awkward, I will say, because it is like a lot more boys have diagnoses of disabilities than girls do. Still, and that's still like, it's getting a little bit better in, like with the diagnosis in terms of that, because people finding out and everything. But like still, like at that time, like there wasn't that many like even like girls in the classroom too at that time. So like socializing was a little weird about that. But like just with everything in general, throughout my school years, I stayed in public school district throughout my education, and I eventually reached mainstream by the end of middle school into the rest of my high school years. I was very fortunate that in middle school, my speech therapist actually created a social skills program where she pulled out like all the students that she works with, and like once a week, like during my gym period, that I would get to learn like social skills and everything, so that way I would be able to like with making friends and stuff like that. And because with that actually did help me with making my own group of friends, and I'm still like, they're still my best friends to this day, because I keep in touch with them and like hang out with them when I can. And I still keep in touch with them, especially during this time, because everybody knows that during this time it's not easy and stuff. So it's really important to keep in touch with friends and family. But yeah, so just even from there, like into high school, like My freshman year, I'm gonna say this because I did mention it in the interview with Jessica and on the show that like I had a time where my freshman year of high school that there was for me there was someone that I was friends with and they were spreading rumors about me because they just like went behind my back and I didn't know the cues about that. So it was just like completely out of nowhere that they were spreading rumors about me. And my parents relied on the child study team and stuff in my school's psychologist, which I did tell my parents about that, what happened. And I was like, I gotta go talk about this because this is like not good at all. So, and I didn't want to be feeling so down about this. So I went to talk about that and that was all covered, thank goodness. So, but yeah. And another thing is that about with working with the child, with the IEP team and everything, it's so important because when I was transitioning to high school, I went to a high school that I wasn't zoned for because my older sister was in a special program and I decided to go with her because like she helps me a lot transitioning into with high school and stuff. But the high school never received any of my IEP, nothing from my middle school. So it was just a hard transition and everything. And so with all that, my point is that definitely know your child. Like even as for me as a paraprofessional, like in the beginning of school year, I always like get to know the child first. Like that is like the biggest priority of like any professional educator. Like know the like pairing with a child, like first thing. That way they get to know you, you get to know them, and they build a trust with you. So I know, and like definitely reach out in your school, like whatever services that they could provide, like any like social skills, like support and stuff, like with making friends and about with inclusion, because I know that's the biggest word that everybody talks about, is that it's about what's right for the individual. It's about what's right for them. Like inclusion is not just about with being in part of it is with being in a classroom with regular peers, but it's also about with that is the individual going for their best potential. You know what I'm saying? Like with least restrictive environment, like is that their best potential that they could do well in life, you know? So
yeah, that's really great advice, Michele. And it's so important to collaborate. You know, I have some families where I'm doing teletherapy and the number one thing is, and it's going, I would say, better than expected for all families, but surprisingly, and some families even prefer it to regular traditional therapy. But the number one thing that determines whether it's working or, in my opinion, how effective it is how involved the parents are and how well we're working together. You know, I have parents like, I have a session tomorrow and like before this meeting, she texts me and I'm like, here's the stuff. And she has it printed and prepared and ready. And I already kind of got on the phone with her and gave her a 5-minute synopsis of what we're going to do tomorrow. And I know it's going to be an amazing, effective session. And I have parents I work with that are like, oh, here's the kid, you know, and I'm going to put them in front of the computer and I'm going to use this hour to make dinner while you're working with the kid. And I'm like, okay, great. But they're 2 and they'll watch the iPad, but how effective is that? So, you know, it's really just parents have to be involved. I'm a huge advocate. Parents, you have to be involved. Like therapy time, whether it's, and this is a little side note, maybe a little side tangent, but you have to be involved in school. You have to be involved in therapy. Therapy time is not, and I know as a parent, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, and you're trying, like, you might have not even had showered in a week because your kids are home and you don't have a second to yourself. I mean, and I live alone, so it's, I can't even say I get it. I can say I hear you. But despite all of that, therapy time is not babysitting time. It's not time to make dinner. Like this is ultimately what potentially could change your child's future and your child's life. But it's really like you have to be involved with it, or there's very little we can do. Because if I can work with the child for an hour, but if you don't understand what I'm doing and you don't understand what's going on and you don't understand how to carry it over, it's 1 hour that's not, and your child is 23 hours that they're going to be, you know, with you, or pretend maybe awake for, I don't know, 23 minus 8. is 15 hours, right? That the kid, you need to understand what's happening. So that's incredible advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Monica.
Yeah, Jessica, can I add on to something?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so like even through my experiences and stuff, like my parents attended every single of my IEP meetings, and like if it's possible, like later on in my life, I was able to attend with my parents, so that way I could share like what's been going on in the classroom for me and everything. And it just like parents got to be the child's advocate too, and then eventually like you like at the point that it is possible to be able to for the child to learn that too. So it's so important, and like getting the parents involved. Like I just like with you, Jessica, I'm also doing my job at home. Like I'm doing the like I teach in the autism classroom where we're implementing like ABA techniques and everything. Like we do DTT and everything, and it just I do a session like with a child online and stuff. Like I actually do have tomorrow. So but it's just that like seeing the parents involved, that's the biggest thing, where the parent and the therapist or educator or anything, when there's a community that works together, that's where we could drive like success for a child. Like that's so important, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really like what my whole premise of doing this kind of stuff is I want everyone to be on the same page. Parents, children, adults. Like there's even in professionals have to work together. So it's like, it's really important that we're all working together. The speech therapist has to work with the OT. The OT has to work with the behavior person. If the OT person says that the child has sensory needs, that they, require visual input, and the behaviorist might say, oh, well, that's not part of our stuff. And in the ethics code, it says no, forget it. Get over yourself. If the child needs it, the child needs it, the end. You can be a fantastic speech therapist, and you can know everything about articulation that I know nothing about, and that's amazing, and they're needed. But if you're sitting there and you're not acknowledging the sensory needs of a child, the child is not available to learn for you. So you can know everything in the world, and it's not going to make any difference for that individual if you're not taking into that individual's needs in account. And Monica's like giving me a virtual high five. So I'm glad. And not a lot of professionals are saying that. And I think that's really why I'm really trying to do this, is like, autism, what we know about it has changed in the last, since I've started, certainly in the last 40, 50 years. In the 60s, they blamed moms that didn't love their kids on why autism, the cause of autism. We've come a really long way since then, but we got a long way to go. So Monica, if you want to share your perspective on this, and also on what I just said, because I saw you were really getting a little bit emotional, excited about what I was saying.
I want to back up to what you had asked me before about diagnosis, pro work on getting a diagnosis, because you had mentioned comorbid disorders with autism, and that brought up, I had something to say about that, so I want to back up there for a second. I made notes.
Awesome.
So I also have EDS, which Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's hypermobility. I'm pretty flexy, which causes sublux joints, joint dislocation, and inability to sedate or freeze. So I had very traumatic dental work all my life, because I was telling my mom it hurts, and the dentist was telling her that he wasn't hurting me. So I was getting in trouble when I wasn't frozen. So EDS would have been more likely diagnosed if I was diagnosed autistic. I also have vasovagal syncope, which means that my blood pressure tanks randomly, which is comorbid with EDS. So if I was diagnosed autistic, I would have been diagnosed with EDS, and I would have had the diagnosis for vasovagal syncope. But because I wasn't diagnosed last year, my heart stopped, and I sustained a severe brain injury because I collapsed on my tile floor. So it's kind of a domino effect that if you can deal with get over the hump of this is just my kid, then you can break down the things that are challenging for your kid because of the thing that is just your kid. If that makes sense. So that was what I had to say about diagnosis. And now I want to go through, like some other people did, kind of my history in how my education went, and then I have some opinions on it too. So I think an important note for me as a kid was I didn't go to any daycare. My mom kept me out of school as long as she could. So she stayed home with my brothers and myself all until we were 5. So in our province, so I'm in Ontario, Canada, you can start kindergarten here. There's 2 years of kindergarten. So there's junior kindergarten, which is optional. And then there's senior kindergarten and then grade 1, grade 2, like you guys have. So junior kindergarten is option. It's like free daycare with like, you know, learning the alphabet and how to write your name and whatever. My mom kept us out of junior kindergarten, which was kind of a little bit controversial at that time. But for the most part, like there wasn't any pressure really that your kid has to go to JK. So she kept us out of school until we were 5 years old. So we were home with her for the first 5 years of our lives. We had an occasional babysitter daycare set up if she got called to work unexpectedly or something like that. But for the most part, we spent the first 5 of our years of our life at home. When I started school, I entered the public system, which is Limestone District School Board here. I think that's noteworthy is that every single district is going to be different. So what my public school district offered me will be very different from what your public school district is going to offer your little guy. So I was academically, I was very successful in school, but I was unmotivated. I was sad, isolated, and eventually I just gave up and shut down. So I was in grade 5. And I started failing all my classes just kind of somewhat randomly. I had just shut down. I just felt like I didn't fit and I didn't know why I couldn't make sense of my peers, and I was teary-eyed a lot, and I'm a pretty tough kid. I grew up with big brothers. Like, I'm not like gonna go pout about something, but I just couldn't keep myself together a lot of the time. So my parents got called to the school, and my teacher was like, I don't know how to help her because she's smart, but she won't do the work. And I had my head on the table and I was crying, and my parents are like, what do you need from us to want to be successful at school? Like, what do you need for us to help you with? And I just kept saying CCA, which was it's Cornerstone Christian Academy. It's the private school that is in my community here in Ontario that my one like really solid friend went to. So my parents used my college fund to send me to private elementary school. And they pulled me out of the public system like a couple weeks after that conversation and switched me to the private school. In the private school, I was in a class of, I had 8 peers in my grade. Well, no, I was one of 8, so 7 peers. And it was a split grade. So I had, there was 11 kids in the other grade. So a class of 19 versus a class of 35. The curriculum was more advanced, but also a lot easier for me to track. So like the curriculum style alone was better for me. The teachers were invested and loving, and they had personal connections with the students. Like we would go to our teacher's house for sleepovers. Like, it's weird to think about now, but we had very close connections, and that's what I needed socially, is I needed the strength of connection, not quantity. And I did well socially in a smaller environment. So then I was in the private school until grade 8. We don't have middle school in my hometown. You have elementary school, which is kindergarten to 8, and then high school is 9 to 12. So I went back to public school for high school, and I felt alone again. My academics tanked. So when I started grade 9, I was doing math at a grade 11 level. And by the time I got a smaller environment. So it's not, so the private environments that I was in weren't necessarily geared for an autistic child, but I acclimated better in them because of the style of community in a smaller environment. So one, less sensory input, less overwhelming, less bodies in the room. That alone really helps me. But also, I wasn't trying to develop relationships with 30 other kids. There was 7. And I got close with those 7. And those 7 are still people that I chat with occasionally. Like, we're not best friends. We don't, like, I left the province for 5 years. So, like, not close to them. But there's still people that I could pick up a conversation with because I developed that depth of connection at a younger age versus trying to connect with 30 kids and just being overwhelmed. So some of my work experiences are I've worked in daycares in being a one-to-one support and being a classroom teacher. I've worked in public schools as a one-to-one support, and I also worked in so when I was doing formal ABA service, which I no longer agree with, I did school transitions with my kids. So I would, when they were coming out of full-time 20-hour-a-week ABA into a kindergarten environment, I went to school with them for the first month to transition them into the school environment, which I hated every day of it. Every day I left crying. I had a really hard time putting my kids that I had lovingly devoted 2 years of my life to their quality of life into the vulture-y public school system. So I did public schools. I worked in private schools doing one-to-one support in a volunteer aspect. And I've also done lots of homeschooling for nannying, and through my most recent job before brain injury, I was working with kids who have severe behavioral issues due to trauma. And a lot of those kids I was homeschooling because they were kicked out of school and their parents couldn't cope. So overall, my opinion of all of that is that homeschooling is the best option. I don't believe that the public system is the best for any child because it is mass producing education. And anything that is one size fits all doesn't really fit anyone. So I understand that not everyone can homeschool or is in a financial position to homeschool or has the mental capacity and the patience to homeschool. It is a big job. But I do believe that individual, personalized education is best for every human. I also wanted to make sure that I highlight that, because you mentioned that you're concerned with making sure that he gets appropriate socialization. We need to make sure that we're talking about quality of socialization over quantity, because he could have 3 best friends for the rest of his life and have a way better quality of life than if he knows how to pretend to be neurotypical so that he fits in a boardroom. And also, I want to remind you, every single school district is different. So be actively involved and trust your gut. And if something feels like this isn't increasing his quality of life, this isn't supporting who he is now and drawing him into the future, it's trying to make him act neurotypical, it is causing meltdown every day, he is regressing academically, all of those things, don't let a professional tell you to wait it out. That's the entirety of my opinion.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the common theme is it depends on the person. And I think the important thing of hearing 6 people share their stories is you'll hear 6 very different stories. And so, you know, there are amazing schools and there are not good schools. I've seen horrific private schools, and I've seen amazing private schools. I've seen horrible public schools, and I've seen amazing public schools. I've seen great teachers, and I've seen teachers that like literally seem like they arrived on this planet today, and they were literally interacting with a human for the very first time. I mean, it's different for everyone. But as a parent, you know, you trust your gut and you know what to do. I think that I would love to continue this conversation. I had a whole list of questions for you guys. We did go like 20 minutes over, so we will have to kind of close out tonight. Would the panelists, would you guys be willing to do this again since we didn't get to everybody's questions?
I'm totally down. This is great.
Yes.
Awesome. So I am going to chat with you guys. I'll send everyone I'll create a messenger group. We'll all chat and we'll figure out when to do this again. But this is amazing. I think this is so important. And I had a whole list of questions to ask you guys we didn't get to. So hopefully we'll do this again and we'll get to them all. Thank you everyone who showed up and who was here. If you are here live, you will get a replay if you want to share this with people. If you have questions you want to send in for next week's episode, you can, or next week, if we do it next week, I'm thinking already next week. This is next week, hopefully next week works for everybody, but we'll figure it out. And we'll make this, maybe even make this a regular thing. You can email those questions to me. It's jessica@jessicaleichtweisz.com. I'll put the links also in the replay. This will be on YouTube, so please share it with anyone you know that that might benefit from this question. And just thank you guys so much for being here. It's really my honor to serve you and my honor to really help unite the autism community. I appreciate everyone who came as a parent, as a guest, and to all the panelists. Thank you guys so much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
This was very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.
You too.
Thank you, guys.